a group of bikers stormed into a roadside diner, threatening Tom Hanks. They had no idea they would soon regret challenging the wrong man. What price would they have to pay? On an old federal highway, in a desolate little town that most travelers simply pass through, Tom Hanks, a middle-aged man seeking solitude, drove his old pickup truck into town and pulled up at a roadside diner called Rusty Horse Diner. Outside, a few heavy-duty motorcycles were scattered around, signaling the presence of local bikers. Tom stepped inside, ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and sat quietly, paying no attention to the curious stares from the corner of the diner. At a far table, a group of rugged bikers was gathered, their leather jackets emblazoned with a menacing black vulture emblem. Leading them was Drake, a bald, heavily muscled man with tattoo-covered arms. He swirled his beer in his glass, eyes locked onto Tom, a smug grin forming on his lips. After a few moments of observation, Drake slammed his fist onto the table, shattering the diner's silence. "Hey, old man, who said you could walk in here without greeting us?" Tom set his coffee cup down and calmly replied, "I just want to drink my coffee, not looking for trouble." The bikers erupted into laughter, mocking him. Drake stood up, striding toward Tom's table with his gang in tow. One of them suddenly grabbed Tom's shoulder, attempting to yank him up. But in the blink of an eye, Tom twisted his body, forcefully knocking the biker's hand away, sending him stumbling backward. The air in the diner grew thick with tension. The other customers held their breath, watching. Drake clenched his fists and growled, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, old man." He swung his fist straight at Tom, but in an instant Tom sidestepped, seized Drake's wrist, and twisted it backward. Drake howled in pain, struggling to break free. Another biker pulled out a switchblade and lunged. Tom reacted in a flash, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it hard, forcing the knife to clatter to the floor before delivering a swift spinning kick that sent the attacker crashing to the ground. The rest of the gang charged in, but Tom countered each move with frightening precision. Every punch and kick landed with deadly accuracy. In less than 10 seconds, 5 bikers lay groaning on the floor. Drake struggled to his feet, but his eyes now held a flicker of fear. "Let's end this here," Tom said, his voice cool but not hostile. "I don't want to take this any further." Drake gritted his teeth but knew that continuing the fight would only lead to another humiliating defeat. He spat on the floor and snarled, "I'll let you off this time, but don't let me see you again." Tom didn't respond. He simply pulled out some cash, paid for his coffee, and walked out of the diner. But he knew this wouldn't be the last time the black vultures came after him. The real fight was yet to come. As he turned to leave, a hesitant voice called out, "Hey, who are you?" Tom merely shrugged, offering no answer. He stepped outside, heading toward his pickup truck parked by the road. Just as he was about to shut the door, he could hear the murmurs from inside the diner. He took down the black vultures like it was nothing. "I've never seen anything like that before. He's got to be some kind of martial arts expert or ex-special forces." No one knew that the old man Tom Hanks carried a secret. He held a black belt in karate after years of training in his youth. But Tom had never been one to flaunt it. To him, martial arts were meant for self-defense and stopping harm, not for boasting or intimidation. As he drove slowly down the dark highway, the headlights cutting through the night, the wind whispered against the windows. His heart pounded not from fear, but from the flood of old emotions resurfacing. These fights reminded him of his younger days. Years ago, when he was still a young man full of ambition, Tom spent years training in martial arts, specifically karate. He had learned in a small dojo on the outskirts of town. With unwavering determination and a desire to sharpen himself, he spent day after day sweating on the training mat. There were no shortcuts to mastery, only hard work and perseverance. Over the years, he collected scars and injuries, but eventually, he earned the coveted black belt, a quiet pride he had always kept to himself. That night, as darkness swallowed the road, Tom found himself lost in thought. He felt no pride in taking down a gang of thugs after all. It was just muscle memory, a reflex for survival. However, he had a bad feeling about what was coming next. The black vultures wouldn't let this go easily. Drake seemed like the stubborn and vengeful type. This wasn't over. But exhaustion overtook him. He decided to find a small motel in town, rent a room for the night. The dim moonlight streamed through the old window of his simple, worn-down room. Tom lay back on the bed. Just before drifting off to sleep, he muttered to himself, "I just need to get out of here early. Everything will be fine." Little did he know, while he turned off the lights and rested, elsewhere in town, Drake and his gang were gathering in an abandoned warehouse. Thick cigarette smoke filled the air, the flickering neon signs overhead casting eerie shadows. The night was far from over. Drake sat in the center, his eyes burning with fury. Beside him, two bikers were still clutching their injured arms and legs, groaning from the beating they had received at the diner. Another one had a bandage wrapped around his head, a dried streak of blood visible on his forehead. The air was thick with tension. Drake hissed through his teeth. "Some worthless old man humiliated us. Look at yourselves." He tore apart the Black Vulture's reputation right in front of those diner folks. The gang growled in frustration, their expressions dark and menacing. The hiss of cigarettes, the clinking of beer bottles, and the muttering of curses filled the air. One of them spat. "We need to settle this. We can't let that old bastard walk away laughing at us." Another chimed in, "I heard he knows martial arts. He fights dirty. I didn't even get a chance to swing my knife before he snapped my wrist." That comment made Drake's rage boil over. He gritted his teeth and growled. "I don't care if he knows martial arts or whatever. We're teaching him a lesson. Have you all forgotten who we are? The Black Vultures fear no one. If one-on-one doesn't work, we'll use numbers. He's alone. We have an entire gang." The bikers immediately roared in agreement. Drake shot up from his seat, knocking over his beer, his voice dripping with malice. "Listen up. Tomorrow, that bastard is leaving town. We'll cut him off on the forest road. No witnesses. No interruptions. We'll make him regret ever messing with the Black Vultures." The gang nodded, their eyes glinting with cruelty. The plan was set. The night faded into the simmering heat of vengeance. The next morning, Tom woke up, packed his belongings, and headed down to the motel reception. He checked out, leaving a small tip for the young receptionist in appreciation of her hospitality. The sky was clear, sunlight filtering through the trees. The town looked peaceful, completely different from the tense atmosphere of the previous night. Tom got into his pickup truck, started the engine, and muttered to himself, "I just need to leave. Forget about last night. I don't want any more trouble." But deep down, the feeling of another confrontation still lingered in his gut, refusing to let him fully relax. He drove slowly out of town, passing through narrow roads. Occasionally, a few locals eyed his truck curiously, but Tom didn't stop. As he reached the old federal highway, the road stretched ahead, flanked by dense pine forests. The open sky above gave a sense of vast emptiness. The silence was almost unsettling. Then, up ahead, he saw an old truck parked sideways across the road, completely blocking the path. Tom eased off the gas, his brows furrowing. Something was off. A truck stalling in the middle of a deserted forest road like this. His instinct screamed, "Be careful." At that moment, the roar of motorcycle engines erupted behind him. Tom glanced at the rearview mirror, nearly a dozen bikes speeding toward him. The sun reflected off their glossy black paint, the vulture insignia on their jackets a clear sign of trouble. No doubt about it. The Black Vultures. Tom brought his truck to a stop and stepped out, keeping his composure. The motorcycles surrounded his vehicle, kicking up dust as they revved their engines, filling the air with a deep, growling rumble. He spotted Drake sitting on the biggest bike in the center, staring at him. The gang leader flipped down his kickstand, swung off his bike, and removed his helmet, revealing his bald head and scarred, hardened face. "We meet again, old man," Drake sneered. The other bikers spread out, forming a tight circle around Tom. Some of them were the same men he had put down the night before, now back with bandages on their hands and heads, their eyes burning with resentment. Tom took a slow breath and nodded. "I take it you guys didn't learn your lesson last night, huh?" Drake chuckled darkly. "On the contrary, we did learn something. One-on-one you might be tough, but against all of us, doesn't matter how good you are, you can't beat numbers." Tom remained silent, scanning the area. The road was empty. The truck ahead blocked the way. Behind him, the gang sealed off his escape. A perfect trap. Yet he wasn't afraid. If anything, a quiet sense of calm settled over him. Because he knew he didn't just know martial arts. He had years of real experience, more than these bikers could possibly imagine. One of the gang members growled impatiently, "Drake, I can't wait anymore. Let me take him out myself." Without waiting for permission, the biker pulled a long hunting knife from his belt, its blade glinting in the sun. He charged at Tom with a snarl, moving like a wild animal. Tom sidestepped effortlessly, catching the man's elbow and twisting his arm backward. The biker gasped in pain, his knife slipping from his grip. Tom kicked it away, then applied pressure, forcing the man to his knees. A sharp crack sounded, followed by a pained scream as the biker collapsed, his arm useless. Immediately, 3 more attackers lunged. One swung a baseball bat, another lashed out with a steel chain, while the third circled behind, hoping to catch Tom off guard. Tom remained calm. He stepped into the swing of the chain-wielding thug, grabbing his wrist and yanking it in the opposite direction. The biker lost balance, crashing into the one with the bat. At the same time, Tom pivoted, delivering a sharp sweeping kick that sent the third man sprawling. Chaos erupted. Drake's eyes widened as his men dropped one after another. Furious, he bellowed, "All of you get him." 10 bikers rushed in at once, surrounding Tom like a pack of wolves. Drake was confident now. No matter how skilled Tom was, sheer numbers would eventually wear him down. Weapons appeared: bats, knives, chains, even a pistol in one man's hand, but none of them fired. Not yet. Gunfire would draw attention, and they wanted this to be quiet. Tom exhaled slowly. His body loosened, his mind sharpened. He had been here before, outnumbered, outgunned. And yet, he had survived every time. The fight was far from over. Tom moved with precision, exploiting even the smallest gaps to evade attacks. Every strike he delivered hit a pressure point, immediately disabling his opponent. But the sheer number of attackers made it impossible to avoid every hit. A biker landed a punch to Tom's face, splitting his lip and drawing blood. Another swung a bat into his shoulder, sending a sharp jolt of pain through his body. For a brief moment, Tom staggered. Drake seized the opportunity, rushing forward and landing a brutal hook to Tom's ribs. The impact forced Tom to bend over, stumbling back several steps. The gang erupted into cheers, convinced that they had finally cornered him. But instead of looking defeated, Tom lifted his head, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth. His eyes locked onto Drake's with an unwavering determination. It was at that moment that Drake and his crew began to sense something different about Tom: an unnatural resilience, a discipline in his every move. Tom straightened his posture and said in a low, firm voice, "I'm warning you one last time. Walk away before it's too late." The gang hesitated, some shifting uneasily. But Drake, stubborn as ever, spat, "You're on your last legs, old man. Quit talking tough. And for nothing tougher." Tom closed his eyes for a second, inhaling deeply. Memories of his years on the dojo mat resurfaced, years of relentless training, brutal falls, and sweat-soaked determination. He had endured pain before. He had built himself for moments like this. When he reopened his eyes, his voice was calm but sharp as steel. "I have a black belt in karate, and you're about to find out what that means." The words sent a shockwave through the black vultures. Anyone with even a basic knowledge of martial arts understood that a black belt wasn't just a symbol, it was mastery, technique, and battle-hardened experience. Drake hesitated for a split second, but his anger blinded him to reason. He lunged forward, snarling, "I don't give a damn about your black belt. You're still outnumbered." The gang launched another full-force assault. Tom unleashed everything he had. Every movement was purposeful, every strike ruthless. His punches landed with surgical precision, his elbows and knees striking with devastating impact. Within seconds, 3 men collapsed. 2 others clutched their ribs, gasping for air after taking body blows. Sweat dripped from Tom's forehead, but his movements remained fluid, sharp, and controlled. The black vultures were losing confidence. They had expected to overwhelm him, but watching their own men drop like flies was breaking their spirit. Some hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Drake barked, "Don't let him win. Keep going." But even he was shaken now. He had never seen someone fight like this. Tom wasn't just a skilled fighter, he was a warrior. A trained martial artist backed by real-world combat experience. And when someone like that was cornered, they became even more dangerous. Tom spun, delivering a sweeping kick that took out 2 men behind him. His anger burned not because he enjoyed violence, but because he was forced into this. His survival was on the line. Realizing the tide was turning against him, Drake made a desperate move. He ripped a knife from his belt and charged at Tom, aiming straight for his chest. Tom reacted instantly, He sidestepped, caught Drake's wrist, and twisted it violently. The knife clattered to the ground. Before Drake could react, Tom lifted him off his feet and slammed him onto the gravel. Drake let out a strangled cry, his body limp with pain. The rest of the gang froze, horrified. Their leader lay crumpled on the ground, barely conscious. In less than 5 minutes, Tom had dismantled all of them. Tom stepped toward Drake, crouching slightly, his voice low and menacing. "I could put you in the hospital, or worse, but I don't want to. Leave, and don't come back." Drake trembled, too beaten to respond. His hatred burned in his eyes, but he knew there was no point in fighting anymore. Tom let go of his collar and straightened up, watching the gang for any sign of resistance. But they were done. Those still standing rushed to help their fallen comrades. One biker hauled Drake to his feet. His hands shook as he spat through clenched teeth. "He's a monster. We won't forget this. We will see you again." Tom didn't respond. He stood motionless until the sound of their motorcycles faded into the distance. Only then did he sway slightly, clutching his shoulder, wincing at the pain radiating through his body. There was no denying it, he was exhausted. Fighting off an entire gang had pushed his limits. "I need to get out of here. Now." He walked back to his truck, slid into the driver's seat, and took a moment to catch his breath. He glanced at his bloodied lip in the rearview mirror and sighed. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. No matter how long he had trained, how many fights he had endured, he had never enjoyed violence. But at least the Black Vultures had learned their lesson. Starting the engine, Tom maneuvered around the abandoned truck and drove off. He hoped this would be the last of it, but somehow, deep down, he knew his journey wasn't over yet. Further down the road, Tom stopped at a small gas station to patch himself up. He washed the blood from his mouth and wrapped a bandage around his bruised shoulder. The gas station attendant, a young woman, noticed his injuries and frowned. "You okay? Car accident?" she asked, concerned. Tom forced a small smile. "Just a small scrape. I'll be fine." In reality, the physical wounds were nothing compared to the unease settling in his mind. Sitting on a wooden bench outside the station, he replayed the events in his head. No matter how much he tried to avoid violence, it always seemed to find him. He had left the noisy world of Hollywood to travel freely, to escape the chaos. But somehow, life had a way of throwing him into the fire. In his youth, Tom had dreamed of becoming a great actor, of shining on the silver screen. And he had achieved that dream. Countless roles, awards, admiration. But after years of living under the spotlight, he had grown tired. He had wanted a simpler, quieter life. Yet here he was bloodied, bruised, and entangled in yet another fight. And something told him this wasn't the end. Tom drove on, the road stretching endlessly before him, distant mountains shrouded in mist. He headed west, hoping to find a quieter town to stay the night before continuing his journey. Meanwhile, the Black Vultures were in shambles. Many of them nursed broken bones, dislocated joints, and bruised faces. Drake himself had his arm in a sling, limping with every step. Their reputation was in ruins. Word spread quickly among local biker gangs about an old man with a black belt in karate who had single-handedly taken down the Black Vultures. Before long, Drake became a laughingstock. Humiliated and enraged, Drake decided on one last, desperate move. He gathered what was left of the Black Vultures and called in reinforcements, some of the most vicious men from allied gangs. His goal: to capture Tom Hanks and make him suffer. He wanted to film the torture, restore his tarnished reputation, and remind everyone who really ruled the roads. Somehow, Drake managed to track Tom's direction. He set up roadblocks on key routes. By late afternoon, Tom found himself driving along a desolate mountain pass, winding with sharp turns. That's when he saw them. 2 motorcycles sped ahead, cutting in front of his truck, forcing him to slow down. At the same time, a pickup truck closed in from behind, blocking his retreat. Tom's jaw tightened. The Black Vultures, persistent bastards. Sure enough, Drake emerged, standing in the back of the pickup, his injured arm strapped up, but his face twisted in a vicious grin. Around him were 15 men, armed with bats, chains, and even handguns. The circle around Tom tightened. For the first time, he felt the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a fight anymore. Drake's voice, hoarse from rage, rang out. "You really thought you could just walk away, old man? Today, you pay for everything." Tom scanned the area. Nothing but dense forest and steep cliffs. Driving away was too risky. One shot could blow out his tires, or worse, hit him directly. He exhaled sharply. There was only one choice. Tom opened the door and stepped out of his truck. He wouldn't die trapped inside a vehicle. If this was his last fight, he would face it standing. Drake jumped down from his truck, swaggering toward Tom, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Last time you got lucky. We were short on numbers. Not today," he sneered. Tom remained silent, his gaze sweeping over the gang. He was outnumbered, outarmed, but not outmatched. Drake smirked and tapped Tom's cheek mockingly. "Your black belt won't save you now, old man." One of the bikers swung a rifle butt at Tom's head. But Tom felt it coming. He ducked, dodging the strike, then lunged forward, driving his elbow into the attacker's chest. The man gasped, stumbling backward. Drake's eyes flashed with fury. "Take him down." The gang charged. Tom moved like a storm, weaving through attacks, countering with deadly precision. A biker swung a steel pipe. Tom caught his wrist, twisted it, and forced the weapon from his grasp before slamming his fist into the man's stomach. Another charged with a bat, but Tom sidestepped, sweeping his leg beneath him, sending him crashing to the ground. The gang's confidence wavered as their numbers dwindled. Drake, seething, lunged at Tom, fists flying. Tom was ready. He spun and delivered a roundhouse kick to Drake's temple. The gang leader staggered, dazed. But he wasn't done. Snarling, he pulled a gleaming knife from his belt and slashed toward Tom. Tom dodged, grabbed Drake's wrist and twisted it violently. The knife dropped. In a fluid motion, Tom hooked Drake's arm, flipped him over, and slammed him onto the gravel. Drake lay there, gasping for air, his body limp with pain. Suddenly, the piercing wail of police sirens shattered the air. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the road as patrol cars screeched to a halt. "Cops, we gotta go," a biker yelled in panic. Drake's face drained of color. "Run," he barked. The gang scrambled, some leaping onto their bikes, others sprinting toward the woods. Engines roared as they tried to flee. But it was too late. The police had surrounded the area. Officers tackled bikers as they tried to escape, dragging them to the ground. Drake tried to slip away in the chaos. But Tom moved first. He seized Drake's collar and yanked him back. Before the gang leader could react, Tom drove a powerful punch into his gut. Drake collapsed to his knees, wheezing, his face twisted in agony. Tom leaned in, voice low and cold. "You had your chance to walk away. You didn't take it. Now you deal with the consequences." The officers swarmed in, slamming Drake to the ground and locking cuffs around his wrists. A cop turned to Tom, eyes filled with surprise. "You all right, sir?" Tom exhaled, brushing dust off his jacket. He smirked slightly. "I'm fine. But this town just got a little cleaner." Drake, wrist shackled, shot Tom one final look filled with seething hatred. But he said nothing. This time there was no escaping justice. After taking statements and conducting a preliminary investigation, the police confirmed that the Black Vultures were guilty of multiple crimes: assault, illegal possession of weapons, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. As the gang leader, Drake was facing serious charges and would undoubtedly receive a heavy sentence. Their downfall was inevitable after challenging the wrong man twice. Tom was taken to a nearby county hospital for treatment. The blows to the back of his head had left him sore, but thankfully, he had no major injuries. When the police asked for his full details, he only provided the basics. They wanted to acknowledge him as a hero for helping take down a dangerous gang, but Tom simply shook his head and said, "I was just defending myself." At the hospital, the doctor suggested he stay for a few days for observation, but Tom refused. His journey wasn't over yet. His wounds were cleaned and bandaged, and a few stitches were needed for the cut on his lip. Once everything was taken care of, he thanked the medical staff and walked out. The midday sun cast a warm glow over his tired but peaceful face. A faint smile crossed his lips when he saw his old pickup truck parked outside, waiting for him, loyal as ever. Before leaving town for good, Tom had a brief encounter with the police chief, a dignified man with graying hair. The chief extended his hand. "Thank you for helping us take down the Black Vultures. We've been tracking them for a long time but never had enough evidence. Because of you, we can finally put them behind bars. You're a model citizen." Tom shook his head with a humble smile. "I just happen to be here. If everything's settled, I'd like to be on my way. Keep this town safe." The police chief nodded and exchanged a few more words before letting him go. They stood there, watching as the old pickup truck disappeared around the bend, taking with it the quiet, enigmatic man who had shaken up their town. Tom drove at a steady pace, the endless highway stretching before him. His shoulder ached, and his muscles throbbed with every movement, but his heart felt lighter. He reflected on everything that had happened. For the first time in years, he had been forced into a real fight for survival. It reminded him that not every place was as peaceful as he wished it to be. The world still harbored cruelty, violence, and men who would harm others over pride or power. And then, a simple truth dawned on him. When good is challenged, we must stand and protect it. Even if we stand alone, even if it's difficult, we cannot yield to evil. A black belt in karate wasn't about pride, it was about protecting oneself and those who needed it. And this time, it had saved his life. In the days that followed, Tom passed through a few other small towns, staying for a night here and there, meeting ordinary people, listening to their stories. No one knew the battle he had just fought, and he never spoke of it. His wounds would heal. The memories would fade, but the lessons and the unwavering strength within him would remain. And so, the journey of Tom Hanks, the man with the black belt in karate, continued drifting along the roads of America. The tale of how he single-handedly defeated a ruthless biker gang became a small legend in that town. But to Tom, it was just another chapter in his life, a mix of hardship, pain, and quiet pride. He moved on, leaving behind an unforgettable story. Somewhere on a lonely stretch of road, if you ever see an old pickup truck parked by the roadside with a middle-aged man sipping coffee beside it, stop for a moment and say hello. You might just hear an unbelievable tale about the time he was hunted by an entire biker gang. And if you ask about it, he'll only smile and say, "A black belt in karate isn't for showing off. It's about living true to yourself."